Surely I'm not the only one that's living in this current circumstance and thinking that their ADHD or autism is feeling like it's just getting worse. Now, I know technically ADHD and autism can't get worse in terms of a diagnosis. You couldn't just become more autistic or more ADHD. What I mean is managing in this current society is getting harder to cope with. Now, bear with me as I try and make a list of the current things that I think are affecting ADHD and autism to get worse generally. And this doesn't just have to apply to people who've got neurodivergence issues. This can apply literally to anybody in this circumstance at the moment. But with me being ADHD and trying to push forward this kind of aid to show why it becomes even harder for people with neurodivergence, then this is why I'm going to go onto the list of what I think is just making it even harder. Now, the first one on this list is social media, and I know this one has been covered several hundred times by different YouTubers, different accounts, people who have just said, I'm going on a detox or stepping away from social media. And now I think it depends what social media means to you as well. For me personally, I've stepped away from Facebook, I never really used Instagram. I tried to attempt TikTok with just making this account, to be honest, with this YouTube channel. I couldn't bear it. Like, I feel like personally brain cells was dying as I was using that. So for me, I couldn't use it. And I think I still use Reddit occasionally and also YouTube, which can be seen as social media, but for me, they can be something that can be managed in terms of, I treat Reddit more like a forum, and essentially that's what Reddit still is, but it still has an algorithm that feeds you things along the way, and same with YouTube, but you can be a bit more selective with what you want to see and don't want to see and engage with. Now, social media as a whole, I think, is just getting generally worse. Obviously, one of the biggest topics in the headlines at the moment is AI, how overall, there's more and more generative AI articles, videos, images on the internet, which eventually is just going to further give people conspiracies over the dead internet kind of conspiracy, but you can see why people might go down that rabbit hole as to why the internet is just going to generally become a worse and worse place for people to try and interact and go about in their day-to-day lives, which it might have a positive aspect to all of this, which is that it might eventually make people just step off it. You know, when things become that inaccessible and that hard to navigate, people just decide to give up and move on to the next thing, which generally this is what the step forward with AI could actually achieve. Moving on to that next is just short form content as a whole. Obviously covering TikTok and things like Instagram, things like YouTube Shorts. Now, there's no way to get rid of them, which is so frustrating and annoying. And I'll admit, I've been through them a few times and I've tried to create them for myself on YouTube. It doesn't mean I'm never going to do them, and I don't think they don't have their own purpose, but generally they are just brain rot kind of material. They're things that keep your short-term engagement. You can see your attention getting fragmented, which is even more difficult for people with ADHD and autism, because I feel like you're easier to go down that rabbit hole, get hyper-focused, and then not realise that an hour's passed, which you could have spent doing something much more productive. And that productive doesn't always have to mean force yourself to do something, because we're living in a world now where everything seems to be where if you're not producing something or trying to look busy, that you're seen as lazy, you're seen as weak, you're seen as not being active. And that's wrong in essence, because sometimes just looking out the window and realising how the world's moving by, or taking the time to enjoy that time where you just sat down with a cup of tea, anything, those moments are productive. You're letting your system relax, you're letting your body realise that it needs that time away from all the noise, over a saturation that we're getting in this day and age. There's not a point where we don't get distracted by something. You know, you switch the TV on, TV's had adverts now. You go past and there's more, in my area, more digital billboards being made. The cars that are now have got more subscriptions in them, you know, it's becoming an oversaturated mess. And I can go onto this little rant forever and a day, but the basis of it is that we beforehand had plug and play. You know, if you go back to early 2000s, from the last time that kind of came about, but we had plug and play. You plugged a PS2 in, you put a game in, that was it. You opened a book up, you read it, that was it. You went on the internet, you went on a website, that was it. You get the point. Now it feels like everything's trying to feed you down an algorithm, down a room, trying to get you to consume more, trying to get you to subscribe to something else, that it gets too much. And this is another thing where I think it becomes, and it becomes burnout. It leads to burnout. And I think it's something that we need to start addressing and starting to see how we move forward through this. Through more and more things becoming subscription-based, through becoming AI-based, and how we become more selective in what we choose to do in life. And moving on past that, I will just quickly cover is the AI slop as a whole. You know, there's more and more that's coming out that's AI articles, images, videos that's getting generated. I can't remember the statistics for all of this. I'm sure it's had like 12 million images, something daft like that is being made a day that's going out on the internet, which effectively is... The irony is that AI is eventually going to start eating its own crap, its own feces. That the more articles that come out that's AI based, the more images, the more videos, it's going to learn off its own output, which then eventually it's not going to... I can't see how it's eventually going to learn and get past those points, that it's going to be a snake eating its own tail mentality. We move forward saying AI is going to be this great big thing, but all I see from a large amount of people on the internet, just even talk to people face to face, is I just see negativity around AI. I don't see any positivity moving forward, how it affects and helps our economy, unless it can make automation such a thing that we get past being able to have a universal base income, which I'm just not seeing at this moment in time. I think that if we can see it become that it can do jobs that then can make things a hell of a lot cheaper to afford, and even then it's such a minefield that we can go through so many logistics of what AI can become, what it's doing to our economy, financially, what it's doing to our world, the amount of resources, you know, water, electrics. It's such a big pot that whether it succeeds or whether it fails, it's going to have such devastating circumstances to a lot of us that we don't know what to do moving forward. And I feel like they're trying to incorporate it everywhere to be this next big buzzword. And it's not the first thing to ever do it. People compare it to the dot-com crash. You can compare it to things like when TVs started moving to things like HD and then Ultra HD, and it's just another buzzword to push into everything to make out as though their product somehow is much better. And I think ironically all of this then can just lead to stress. Lead to stress financially, lead to stress economically. What do we do moving forward? There's such a big kind of plot hole at the moment where people are saying we're not having children. We're not moving forward because we don't know what is happening for us, that we aren't going to put that on the next generation. And I completely understand that, you know. I have a child myself. I've got a second child on the way, and to look at it and think, it does scare me sometimes thinking what is there for my children in the next 10, 15 years? What is going to be there from opportunity-wise, job-wise? What is going to be there from economically? Are they going to have to stay with us till they're 30, 40 years old? That might sound daft, and honestly, it doesn't bother me if that were the circumstance, but I don't want that for them. I want them to have a better life. Isn't that the whole point of why sometimes we have children, and learn from our own mistakes and learn from our circumstances to move a system forward to give them a better life and better opportunities? And at the moment, that isn't there. And I've already touched on this, but I will just go back to the whole distractions things, especially again for ADHD and autism. People with distractions all over the place now become much more fragmented. And we've already covered social media, we've already covered streaming to some extent, you know, that leads to analysis paralysis. People don't know what to choose anymore. It's always that, you probably heard the reference before of someone who's saying that if you had 3 ice cream choices, you're much more likely to choose between the 3, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry as an example, compared to you've got 20, it's going to be much harder to make that choice, but also know if you made the right choice. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of us. And I think that gets worse with neurodivergency, because it's so much harder to make a choice and stick to it, knowing that there's something else that could be done that's around the corner. And that leads into even things with just like work, answering emails, just jobs being kind of all over the place. Some are fragmented, some are flexible, some are wanting to be rigid, some won't make access to work easier for people that need it. And it all comes from a lack of knowledge. I think some people just don't know what it means to have neurodivergence. And I think it's too much of a buzzword again that's created on the internet especially from news articles, because there's a lot of negative news articles around neurodivergency and trying to make out as though everybody's got ADHD and stuff now. No, they haven't. It's clear that there's a massive underdiagnosis, the thing I always compare it to is something like diabetes. It could be anything, but I'll just say diabetes. If we all of a sudden found out what diabetes was and why it happens, and then all of a sudden thousands upon thousands of people got diagnosed with it, would we also say, all of a sudden say everybody's got diabetes? No, we'd say that everybody now knows what it means to have this problem with insulin, or, you know, problems with blood sugar levels. It's that kind of same circumstance, but because it's neurological, something in the head, something that we don't know, we can't see, it's so easy to make out as though it's something that everybody's just faking. And I think all of this just leads to information overload. I just generally think, again, if you are neurodivergent or not, but I think it has a bigger effect on neurodivergent people, that being overloaded is something that the brain just can't cope with. It leads to burnout. It leads to shutting down. I know that for myself because I'm dealing with it for myself. I'm trying to go through help. I'm trying to go through support. I'm trying to learn how to switch off, how to get offline, how to make myself more accepting of my own circumstances, but also what I can do without just constant interruption, constant noise, constant feeling like there's a 24-hour news loop that's always shouting at you, DMs that can get you from nowhere, or reach you out of nowhere now. And if you don't answer in 5 minutes, you're expected to always have your phone on you, always be available. It's wrong. It's not something that humans were built for. We need to have our own engagement. We need our own time. We need places where we can just go, I'm going to read, I'm going to paint, I'm going to play a game. We need those times where we can say, I'm going to sit and concentrate on this one thing. And again, that's ironic for people who have got ADHD and autism to try and say to do that, but it becomes so much harder to do when everything feels like a choice, everything feels like a chore. And I think that's another thing for me. Even games, I love video games, you know, I enjoy gardening, I try and enjoy doing things like painting, colouring, but it's so hard to start those things from my perspective of what I have up with me, but also feeling like there's always something else that needs doing, something else that requires the attention, my attention. And it's like even just going through the morning, no longer is it just going through your post, it's going through emails, it's going through like to-do lists. Like it's so hard to try and navigate that life that the outside noise is just making it twice as hard, in my opinion, if not even 3 or 4 times harder. It's making everything so hard to navigate, whether it's through banking, whether it's through accessing forms, whether it's filling out things. I always thought that technology as a whole, regardless of AI, was supposed to make life easier. If anything, I feel like it's made life harder. I feel like everything requires attention now, to the point where you can't focus on one thing without something else being there to distract you. I'm going down like a rabbit hole here. I'm going on. I know I'm repeating myself, but the point I'm trying to make is that stepping away from these things is something that we need to address. We need to acknowledge, even down to people I've seen, you know, going back to the whole dumb phones. I know that isn't a mass amount of people, but I can understand why people are doing it. And for me, I'm trying to just delete apps that I'm not going to use anymore. I feel like they're just to eat my time away, instead of feeling like I want to move forward with something that's going to help me in life instead of hinder me. And covering all this in a nice bubble is just kind of like productivity issues. I feel like all of this leads up to the same things, that if we're not always busy, if we're not always trying to look productive, if we're not always trying to keep ourselves active, that we're deemed as lazy. And that can sit even harder with ADHD and autism. It can sit even harder thinking that you are worthless, that you are useless, that you are not being enough. When you are, I can guarantee a large proportion of people out there are enough. They are doing enough. They've got enough on their plate. Yet trying to feel like that you aren't doing more, you're not learning more, you're not doing more hours, you're not allowing yourself to have them downtimes, is just always leading to things like RSD. It's leading to things like isolation. People just feel like they're just not involved. If people feeling if they're not involved, that somehow they are lacking in some way. Now, I know this has seemed a bit of a rant video, and I'd apologise. I wanted to try and get it out there into the ether to see if I'm just not the only one that's feeling this way, not the only one that feels like burnout is just constantly happening, to feel like they are trying to slowly escape what is going on in reality. You know, it's I've heard it many times, the whole, we used to go on the internet to escape reality. Now that's kind of going the opposite way. You know, I'm trying to find myself even reading more. I find reading so difficult to do But I'm trying my best to pick up a book and do that, trying to get offline hobbies, trying to even delete things like subscriptions and going back to physical media, which I'm going to cover in a completely different video. But trying to help my own head navigate through the circumstances of what we are currently living in. So please, if you're going through this as well, please leave it in the comment sections. Please tell me your own experience on all of this. If I'm not just going like it's insane and feel like I'm all alone in this situation. Thank you for watching this video. Apologise if it's just felt like a rant, but it's trying to help other people as well realise that they're not alone in this situation. And like this video, please share it. I'm going to be making similar content like this as well as more around ADHD and autism. And I'll hopefully see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.